To start off, it would be best to get an idea of what Maryland was like during colonial times. First colonized by George Calvert and his sons in 1632, Maryland was actually founded as a state for Catholic refugees. He wanted a place where Catholics could worship freely and somewhere with a warmer climate. Maryland is a middle state right on the east coast, sharing a northern border with Pennsylvania. Because of this, conflict arose. The two states argued over the shared border, which led to the creation of the Mason-Dixon line. British astronomers and surveyors Charles Mason and Jeremiah Dixon established a border in a mostly wilderness area. It is unknown but very possible that there was a bias for one state over the other when creating this border. The line played a large role all the way to the 1800s as it separated the slave states from the free states during the Civil War. Now moving to the horizontal ends of the colony. The west side of the state was known for its continental climates, while the east had a more humid subtropical type of environment. During the winter, these two environments did share one thing: ice. Ice played a large role on the east coast because of the water. This could have had an effect on the sea trading for many colonies, including Maryland. While on the topic of trade, let's bring up one of Maryland's main exports: tobacco. When colonizing the new land, settlers had seen and learned from the mistakes of other colonizers. The people moving to Maryland went straight to the field after watching the first Virginia settlers seek gold and ultimately failing. This tobacco cash crop allowed Maryland to build its economy early. With help from the native tribes, such as the Nanticoke and the Shawnee, they were able to exchange new farming techniques which allowed for maximum profit. Tobacco was a leading cause of Maryland's growth and success, but also led to the decrease of Native American population. It is estimated that the Native American population went from 24,000 to less than 3,000 in 1650 due to war, disease, and the large migration of foreigners into the state. Maryland, however, still stuck to this crop for quite some time and eventually became popular for shipbuilding, metalworking, and manufacturing of men's clothes in the city of Baltimore during later years. Baltimore also became a key city as it acted as a major supply center during the Revolutionary War. Now, the last and possibly most important piece of background information about Maryland is its religion. Maryland began as a Catholic-dominated state which had a large impact on later laws and actions. In 1649, the Act of Toleration was passed, which essentially ensured religious tolerance within the state. While this was a big step towards religious freedom for the country, it also had some negative impacts. One of the rules stated that any person who either denied the state's religion or argued against it was fined and, in some cases, sentenced to death. This caused almost all individuals to become part of the religion, but also instilled a fear in many. Now that we have most of the background information down, let's address the big elephant in the room: the idea of revolution and ultimate independence. Maryland was not a huge fan of this idea at first, but eventually signed the Declaration of Independence after being influenced by other states' opinions and past events. They strive for the idea of a peaceful reunion with the Crown up until this point. 4 delegates from Maryland participated in the signing, which included Charles Carroll, Samuel Chase, William Paca, and Thomas Stone. Now, I mentioned the impact of past events on Maryland's decision-making during this time, but what were some of those events? The first took place over a century before in the year 1645. Richard Ingle, who I must state was an English Protestant sea captain, led a rebellion against the governor of Maryland at the time, Cecilius Calvert. This raised tensions between the colony and the crown, as well as the dominant religions at the time. It gave Maryland the impression that the English were mostly violent individuals. The next was a minor change, but had a large impact on the mindset of Maryland's population. In 1694, England moved the capital of Maryland from the Catholic-dominated town of St. Mary's City to a Protestant-dominated town named Anne Arundel Town, which was ultimately renamed to current-day Annapolis. This event caused the power dynamic to change. The Protestant population gained power over the Catholics. This caused oppression against the Catholic religion in later years with the disenfranchising of all Catholics in the colony in 1718. This lasted until the year 1776. The last and possibly most important event which affected Maryland's decision was the French and Indian War. After the war, Britain implemented very harsh and unfair taxation policies on the colonies to help pay off the war debts. These included the Stamp Act, the Sugar Act, the Townshend Acts, and more. This caused Maryland's hate for the British to skyrocket. This led to not only the Boston Tea Party, but two more smaller tea parties in Maryland as well. In 1774, two tea parties in Chestertown and Annapolis occurred. While these were minor events, they ultimately convinced many to adopt the revolutionary mindset and showed the influence larger states had on others, in this case, Massachusetts and Maryland. These minor and major events all added up to help swing Maryland towards the idea and acceptance of revolution and ultimate independence.
Maryland skimmed the lines between Federalist and Anti-Federalist. On one hand, they had semi-united religious values. On the other hand, they had an economic capitalist base, promoting fortune and favor. Now, these two ideals combined when it came to the Constitutional Convention. Maryland ended up sending 5 delegates, partly because 2 of them left in the middle of the convention. The first one we'll look at was Daniel Carroll. He was a gentleman planner, an ideal man, and he didn't actually arrive at the convention until July 9th. However, he was strongly enthusiastic about the union of the states and avidly promoted it once he left. Daniel of St. Thomas was a state manager of the financial aspects, and he as well favored the union. Then we get to James McHenry. He missed many meetings of the convention due to his sick brother, but he also studied under Ben Franklin and was a military surgeon that served under Washington. He was unimportant in the convention in the long run, but he did in fact support the Constitution. Now, the 2 men who ended up leaving the convention were Luther Martin and John Francis Mercer. John Francis Mercer was a Virginian representative in the Continental Convention, but he moved to Maryland later and came to the Constitutional Convention. He's thought to be a Maryland farmer who was a famous writer who posted many anti-Federalist publications. Luther Martin, on the other hand, was the Attorney General, and he hated the secrecy of the convention. He disliked centralization, and he attacked the idea in many newspapers once it was up for debate. However, both of these men later joined the Federalists, as both of them ended up despising Jefferson in later elections. Maryland was the 7th to adopt the Constitution fully. However, part of the problem of why they were so uppity to do so was because it lacked a Bill of Rights. In fact, in their own Constitution, they had a Bill of Rights embedded into their document, and it was unanimous in creation upon being crafted. After the Constitution was ratified, the government had to start paying off its debts. So, a tax was placed on spirits and any alcoholic beverage in general. Now, many of the agrarian members of Maryland were obviously upset by this tax. However, in 1791, tensions flared, and the Whiskey Rebellion occurred in Philadelphia, one state over from Maryland. Now, George Washington sent letters to Maryland asking for militiamen if the rebellion didn't end peaceably. Now, of course, negotiations were tried first, but once they failed, George Washington and his militia came in like this. After the rebels saw this, they were quick to disperse. But many still despised the tax that was placed on them, dividing Maryland between Federalist and Anti-Federalist. After George Washington left office, many still supported the Federalists in Maryland, and in the 1796 election, 7 electors were for Adams, while only 4 were for Jefferson, proving that Maryland was indeed a Federalist state at that time. However, in 1800, the vote was split 5 for Adams and 5 for Jefferson, showing a general trend more towards the anti-Federalist side. Now, in the 1804 election, no one can really say if it was the fact that Maryland was becoming way more anti-Federalist, or if it was the fact that Adams was no longer running and instead Pinckney in his place. But Jefferson won 9-2 this time. All of these things, from the Constitutional Convention to the Whiskey Rebellion, inspired a sense of divide within Maryland. And it may have gone back and forth between Federalist and Anti-Federalist, but one thing is for sure, Maryland seemed to always be a state divided.